Sales of existing homes in March had their biggest monthly decline in more than 2 years after mounting economic uncertainty roiled the housing market at the start of the critical spring selling season. Sales of existing homes in March posted their biggest monthly decline in more than 2 years, after mounting economic uncertainty roiled the housing market at the start of the critical spring selling season. U.S. existing home sales fell 5.9% in March from the prior month to a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 4.02 million, the National Association of Realtors said Thursday. That marked the biggest month-over-month decline since November 2022. It was also the slowest sales pace for any March since 2009, which was near the peak of the financial crisis. The sharp drop in sales dashes early hopes that this spring would offer signs of a turnaround. The season is usually the busiest time for home sales because many buyers with children want to move homes over the summer, and sellers wait until the spring to list their homes to meet that higher demand. So far this spring, supply is increasing faster than demand. The inventory of homes for sale is rising because some sellers who have been waiting for mortgage rates to fall have decided they can't keep waiting. The average rate on the standard 30-year fixed mortgage was essentially flat this week at 6.81%, according to mortgage finance giant Freddie Mac. But with home prices near record highs and mortgage rates holding above 6.5%, buyers are being choosy. That is setting the stage for potentially a third straight year of anemic sales activity, after sales fell in 2023 and 2024 to levels not seen since the mid-1990s. The sales decline in March was much worse than expected. Economists surveyed by the Wall Street Journal had estimated a monthly decrease of 3.1%, compared with the 5.9% drop. Even with more inventory, existing home sales are struggling to get traction, said Lawrence Yun, NAR's chief economist. I was hoping that we would begin to see some meaningful recovery this year. Well, so far it's not happening. March sales fell 2.4% from a year earlier, NAR said. The March data largely reflects purchase decisions made in February and January, before U.S. tariff announcements upset the market and prompted some economists to forecast a recession. Home sales rose in February, after some buyers and sellers who had been waiting for the market to improve decided to act. But in recent weeks, economic uncertainty has intensified, spooking more buyers and even causing some home sales to fall through. Americans sometimes postpone major purchases such as a new home when they are concerned about the economy, fear that their jobs might be at risk, or worry about stock market losses. Home prices rose in March on a national basis because the inventory of homes for sale is still lower than normal pre-pandemic levels. But prices in some regions, especially in Texas and Florida markets where inventories have climbed, have started falling from a year ago. The national median existing home price in March was $403,700, up 2.7% from a year earlier and the highest median home price for any March, NAR said. Nationally, there were 1.33 million homes for sale or under contract at the end of March, up 8.1% from February and up 19.8% from March 2024, NAR said. There seem to be some more choices for buyers and things seem to be slightly less competitive, said Aaron Stumpf, a real estate agent in Sacramento, California. Almost 1 in 4 listings on Zillow got a price cut in March, the highest proportion for any March since at least 2018, Zillow said. Buyers have more negotiating power to ask for a lower price or for other concessions, such as seller payments toward closing costs or a mortgage rate buydown. About 44% of purchases in the first quarter included a seller concession, according to real estate brokerage Redfin. Anna and David Howard bought a house in Greensboro, North Carolina this month. They paid the $495,000 listing price and got a $10,000 concession from the sellers to help cover the cost of roof repairs. We're still in a slowdown in sales, which worked out for us, Anna Howard said. We didn't have to bid against anybody else. Inventory is still low in the Northeast and Midwest, leading to more buyer competition. Sam and Kayla Johnson decided to upgrade from their townhouse in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, to a bigger house because they are expecting their second child. There weren't a lot of homes for sale in their area, which worked to their advantage as sellers. They got 7 offers and sold their home in March for about 10% above the listing price. The couple bought a 4-bedroom home. They were reluctant to give up the low mortgage rate on their townhouse, but their need for extra space was more important, Sam Johnson said. This kind of feels like the new normal, he said about current mortgage rates. The CEOs of American Airlines, PepsiCo, Procter & Gamble, and many other major U.S. companies warned that shape-shifting tariff threats make it virtually impossible to plan and are spooking consumers. American, Southwest Airlines, and Alaska Air Group told investors and analysts that leisure travel had already softened and pulled their full-year outlooks because the economic climate makes it too tough to forecast. Procter & Gamble, the maker of Pampers diapers and Tide detergent, said it was considering raising prices on some items. And auto industry groups representing General Motors, Volkswagen, and Toyota sent a letter to President Trump imploring him to reconsider the 25% tariff on car parts that goes into effect May 3rd, because it will make buying and repairing cars and trucks more expensive. "We don't know what is going to happen," Robert Isom, CEO of American Airlines, told investors and analysts Thursday. He said the airline is being cautious. "What does that mean?" "It means that we don't hire as much. It means that we don't bring on as many planes, potentially. It means a reduction in overall economic activity." The same frustrating limbo looms over people trying to plan vacations, Isom said. More executives, from Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon to Virgin Group founder Richard Branson, warned Wall Street and the Trump administration of the damage to the economy that tariffs will cause. Branson said Trump could do lasting harm with unpredictable trade policies that took a booming economy and shook it to its core. "It's just such a pity because everything was going so well up to about 3 months ago," Branson said. White House spokesman Kush Desai said, "Under President Trump, business leaders are making trillions in historic investment commitments and driving the robust private sector hiring reflected in multiple jobs reports." CEOs have sought to assure investors they can weather the tariff storm, but many also said they hoped the erratic nature of the Trump administration's tariff strategy would soon end. Planning for the future and forecasting profitability amid constantly changing guidance hasn't just caused several companies, including British drinks maker Diageo, to drop their outlook. It led United Airlines to issue 2 forecasts, one for a stable economy and another for a recessionary one. Trump's 90-day delay on imposing so-called reciprocal tariffs has only amped up the uncertainty, Solomon told CNBC. "The mood now is completely different from what it was as Trump took office in January and when the World Economic Forum in Davos was abuzz with optimism that he would usher in an age of less regulation. The level of uncertainty is too high," Solomon said. "It's not healthy and it's affecting investment, spending, and planning." Consumers, meanwhile, are anxious to get ahead of the impending hit to their wallets, especially for big-ticket items. Spending at retailers, particularly on electronics and autos, has increased in recent weeks, as consumers try to buy before costs on everything from TVs to trucks go up by hundreds or thousands of dollars, said Richard Fairbank, CEO of credit card issuer Capital One Financial. That trend helped fuel spending for now, even as consumer sentiment sinks. At the same time, the share of people who make only the minimum payment on their credit cards, a sign they're struggling to keep up with their bills, is back above the pre-pandemic level. Smartphone shoppers would have to shell out more for the devices because there is no way for Verizon to fully absorb all of the tariff costs, CEO Hans Vestberg said. "If the tariff is going to be as high as they say on the handset," Vestberg said, "that's just not going to be possible." Phones and other devices are far down the list of things consumers will part ways with, even as they get more expensive, predicted at T Chief John Stankey. "Unfortunately for the customer, we're going to have to come up with some new ways for them to figure out how to digest that increase." Both companies have raised rates and fees on some wireless and broadband plans in recent years. Verizon this month introduced a 3-year price lock guarantee on some service plans to reassure its customer base. Pulte Group, which sold more than 31,000 homes last year at an average price of $500,000, said that once tariffs are tacked on to many building materials, that price tag will be $5,000 higher. With duties piled on top of everything from porcelain and tile flooring to water heaters and circuit breakers, every new home will cost 1% more. "It'll impact every single price point and consumer group that we serve," James Zummer, a Pulte vice president, said. Several CEOs expressed frustration that manufacturing and hiring in the U.S. doesn't insulate them from Trump's tariff impacts. RTX, an aerospace and defense company that is spending nearly $350 million to expand its plants in Tucson, Arizona, and Asheville, North Carolina, said it expects to take a potential $850 million hit this year from tariffs, even after cost-cutting measures, price increases, and various duty exemptions. A few CEOs voiced support for tariffs. Steel Dynamics CEO Mark Millett said tariffs on steel and aluminum were extremely beneficial. Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla, a major ally of the president and head of the Department of Government Efficiency, sounded dispirited when asked about tariffs this week after reporting the worst earnings his company has had in years. Musk sighed deeply before addressing the trade war, then said he has advocated lower tariffs to Trump directly and would continue to do so. U.S. stocks rallied for a third straight session amid hopes for trade deals and lower interest rates, pushing the S&P 500, Nasdaq, and Dow up 2%, 2.7%, and 1.2%, respectively. Stocks rallied for a third straight session Thursday, lifting the Nasdaq Composite's weekly gain above 5% amid hopes for trade deals and lower interest rates. The relief rally that began with trade deal optimism earlier in the week gained fresh legs with a major boost from technology shares. And investors hoping for rate cuts later this year cheered dovish comments from Federal Reserve officials Thursday. The gains came despite few concrete developments on the trade war front. President Trump told reporters in the Oval Office that U.S. officials met with Chinese counterparts Thursday morning but declined to elaborate. Beijing played down hopes for an imminent rapprochement, saying it hasn't held negotiations with the U.S., let alone reached an agreement. Stock trading continues to be volatile in both directions, reflecting a high level of uncertainty, analysts say. For now, investors are clinging to optimism stoked by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's comments earlier this week that he expects the trade war with China to de-escalate. On Thursday, Bessent said that the U.S. and South Korea might be able to come to a trade agreement as early as next week. Bear market rallies are short, sharp, and ferocious, said Steve Sosnick, chief strategist at Interactive Brokers. People are psyched about this move to the upside, but it's still very volatile. That reflects uncertainty, though for now the mood has flipped from fearful to optimistic. The S&P 500 officially exited correction territory on Thursday and has now made back a substantial portion of the year's losses, closing Thursday down 5.8% in 2025 after being down as much as 15% on April 8. The S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average remain in a bull market, while the Nasdaq entered bear market territory, down 20% from its most recent high on April 4. One reason stocks are holding up in the face of severe tariffs on Chinese imports lies in companies' recent earnings reports, Sosnick said. While many companies have abandoned prior earnings guidance, revisions to the downside generally haven't been severe. If you still believe that double-digit earnings growth is achievable this year, the market is not necessarily overpriced, Sosnick said. Tech shares soared Thursday as investors piled back into what has long been one of their favorite trades. Tech stocks tend to perform well when interest rates are lower, and Fed officials hinted at that possibility Thursday. The Nasdaq rose 2.7% Thursday and is 5.4% higher this week. As earnings season rolls on, investors are closely watching for clues on how the economic and market turmoil is affecting companies and consumers. Companies including Chipotle, PepsiCo, and Merck have warned that tariffs are likely to drive up costs. Google parent Alphabet, a bellwether for the tech industry, reported better-than-expected profits after Thursday's close. Stocks are heading into Friday on track for a banner week, with the S&P 500 up 3.8% and the Dow advancing 2.4%. The market's strong rebound reflects growing confidence that the most adverse outcome can be avoided, wrote Ulrika Hoffman-Burchardi, UBS Global Wealth Management's chief investment officer for global equities, in a note to clients Thursday. She added, however, that upcoming news flow will likely continue to drive short-term swings. The gold business is booming in the Diamond District, where dozens of jewelry dealers cram together on a single block. Gold seller Aaron Achion could hardly finish two sentences without a customer leaning over his display cases to ask about a chain or ring. It was even busier earlier, he said. The last 2 months have been busier than the whole last year and a half. More people are coming to Achion's shop, Jewels of NYC, to buy and sell gold, he said, as prices for the precious metal have soared. While some are looking to unload their jewelry to capitalize on high prices, others want to put their money in one of the few investments that hasn't lost value over the past few months. President Trump's trade war and the shock waves it has sent through the global economy and financial markets has spurred surging investment in gold, one of the market's most time-tested havens. The price of gold on Tuesday hit an intraday high of more than $3,500 a troy ounce. Even when adjusted for inflation, it is nipping at the heels of a record that dates back to 1980. The gold market is propelled by an eclectic group of buyers, individuals shopping at retailers such as Costco, traders investing in gold exchange-traded funds, and international central banks looking to diversify their foreign exchange reserves. The effects of rising gold prices have reached beyond financial markets to the shops on West 47th Street, in New York's epicenter for buying gold, jewelry, and gems. Wedding ring shoppers and security guards mill around the sidewalks lined with display cases and "We Buy Gold" signs. Inside, buyers haggle over watch prices while sellers occasionally pull bullion bars out of safes. Gold buying and selling has surged in recent weeks, jewelry dealers said, in no small part, they suspect, because of recent market volatility. People are feeling out the waters, said David Gavriel, a gold seller at Fantasy Diamonds. They don't know what's going to happen with the economy. Gavriel said there has been more interest among customers to buy pure gold bullion in the form of bars and coins. They're looking at it from an investment standpoint, he said. Investors have long turned to gold for its protective qualities in periods of economic uncertainty. But in recent weeks, the metal also has emerged as one of the few places to shelter from wild stock swings. Traditional hedges, such as U.S. government bonds, have dropped right alongside equities during recent market stumbles. The dollar, which typically strengthens when stocks fall, has slumped. It's giving you a level of protection that very few assets can match, said George Milling Stanley, chief gold strategist at State Street Global Advisors. Gold has traditionally been believed to offer some protection from geopolitical instability just as it does macroeconomic instability, and we have no shortage of either of those right now. Professional investors are taking note. In a Bank of America fund manager survey, nearly half pointed to betting on gold as the most crowded trade in early April. The risks of such crowding became apparent on Wednesday, when gold prices posted their sharpest daily retreat in nearly 4 years, dropping more than 3.6%. Much of the recent boost to gold prices has been driven by large inflows into gold exchange-traded funds, said Suki Cooper, executive director of precious metals research at Standard Chartered Bank. The ETFs allow investors to include gold in their portfolios by purchasing shares of a fund, rather than buying physical coins, bars, or jewelry. The first quarter of 2025 was the second strongest on record for global gold ETF inflows, according to the World Gold Council. Investors poured $21 billion into the funds in the first 3 months of the year. But interest in physical gold also has picked up, said Stephen Gleason, chief executive of the online marketplace Money Metals. The number of people buying and selling gold on the site started rising in February, Gleason said, as stocks began their long declines. Transaction volume then doubled in the week after Trump made his Liberation Day announcement increasing tariffs across the globe. It's no longer that bonds are the alternative to stocks, Gleason said. It's gold. Intel cuts outlook, warns of layoffs, chip maker posts wider loss, looks to cut expenses and capital spending. Intel is buckling down for a difficult time ahead as new chief Lip-Bu Tan begins a turnaround effort. The company posted a quarterly loss on Thursday and gave a weak revenue outlook. It said it would lower its operating expense target this year by $500 million and would reduce it by a further $1 billion next year. Tan said in a letter to employees that layoffs would start this quarter and continue over several months, although he didn't quantify how many employees would be affected. The company is reducing its gross capital spending target by $2 billion this year to $18 billion, reflecting a slowdown in a manufacturing expansion undertaken by Tan's predecessor, Pat Gelsinger. Finance chief David Zinsner said tariffs were affecting the company in 2 ways. Customers rushed to buy electronics in anticipation, contributing to higher-than-expected revenue in the first quarter. Looking ahead, though, he said costs would increase and the market would contract as consumers and businesses face an uncertain economy. Intel's stock fell about 7% in after-hours trading. Intel's revenue was flat in its first quarter at $12.7 billion, above analyst expectations according to FactSet. It reported an $821 million loss, wider than the $381 million loss posted in last year's first quarter. It was the 5th consecutive quarterly loss, the longest streak since at least 1990. Sales rose 8% in the division that sells chips for data centers and artificial intelligence, a rare bright spot. Sales in its personal computer chip division, its largest segment, fell 8% to $7.6 billion. Its contract chip-making business reported $4.7 billion of revenue, up 7%. Intel also gave a forecast of roughly $11.8 billion in revenue for its current quarter, lower than Wall Street forecasts of around $12.8 billion. Zinsner attributed the weaker forecast to elevated uncertainty across the industry. Intel has been struggling, and its board brought on Tan last month to turn things around. He hasn't made many sweeping changes, but he has indicated he wants to eliminate layers of management, potentially a healthy move for a company that lags behind most of its competitors in revenue per employee. As he reins in costs, Tan's mission is to return the company to chip-making leadership after it fell behind in the global competition to make the fastest calculating chips with the smallest transistors. Gelsinger had vastly expanded Intel's manufacturing footprint to accommodate a budding business making chips on contract for outside designers. With the reductions in capital spending, TAN must endeavor to do more with less. Manufacturing issues have made Intel's chips, ubiquitous in PCs, less competitive, and rival advanced micro devices has grabbed market share. More computers also have chips made with an alternative to Intel's fundamental circuit blueprints, including Apple's laptops and a growing slate of Windows PCs with chips from Qualcomm. The bigger challenge for Intel, though, has been artificial intelligence. Intel's AI chips haven't made much of a dent against NVIDIA. Huge spending on NVIDIA's AI chips has also left less money in corporate and government budgets for Intel's data center chips. Sales in the division that houses those chips came to $12.8 billion last year, down from $16.9 billion in 2022, before the AI boom. Intel hasn't attracted enormous outside customers for its contract business, which has called into question the viability of new plants it is building in Europe, and the US. Intel earlier this year pushed the completion date for a $28 billion chip plant in Ohio, originally this year, to 2030. The US government is helping Intel fund chip plants under 2022's CHIPS Act, if Intel meets construction and operational milestones. Gold has once again proven its mettle as a hedge against financial chaos. If history is any guide, the gains may have room to run further. But they could also soon be outshined by that other, less adored precious metal. The yellow metal is a contentious subject in the investment community, with passionate advocates and detractors alike. But a level-headed look at the historical record suggests a clear conclusion. While it underperforms stocks vastly in the very long run, gold is also prone to extended periods of outperformance when things go awry. Silver rallies also tend to follow gold after a lag. Gold did better than the S&P 500 in the 1970s and the first decade of this century. It protected investors from inflation in the first case and from a more general malaise from dot-com bust to financial crisis in the second. It could be set to repeat the feat again. So far this decade, gold has returned 116% compared with 81% for the S&P 500 including dividends, according to FactSet. Still, investors thinking about loading up on gold now could be forgiven for feeling a bit queasy. Gold reached a record in dollar terms this week before pulling back after President Trump softened his tone on both trade and the Federal Reserve. Nonetheless, it is up around 43% over the past 12 months. Luckily, history suggests silver could follow behind it. Silver has risen around 23% over the past year, underperforming gold though still handily beating the S&P 500's 6% return over that period. This likely has to do with silver's split personality. As a precious metal, it carries much of the haven appeal of gold, promising to retain value amid inflation, war, societal strife, and the like. But it also has more industrial uses than gold, such as in electronics and solar panels, making it more economically sensitive. So when markets start fearing a downturn, gold often outshines silver, at least initially. Hard asset aficionados like to keep an eye on the ratio of gold to silver prices, to gauge when the yellow metal is getting overheated. As of Wednesday, gold costs 98 times as much as silver per ounce, down from over 100 earlier this week. The average over the past 30 years has been 68. The only other time in that period when the balance was so out of whack was amid the initial COVID panic in March 2020, when it reached 113. In the 12 months following that episode, silver prices rose 73% while gold climbed just 8%. During the financial crisis, the gold-silver ratio never breached 100. It did rise sharply from 53 in June 2008 to 80 in November. This, too, heralded a strong run for silver. It rose 81% over the subsequent 12 months versus a 44% gain for gold. During a less-remembered market panic in early 2016, the ratio also topped 80. Once again, this led to subsequent outperformance for silver. What could break the pattern this time? A truly ruinous global trade situation might do the trick, thanks to silver's economically sensitive side. But even the recession triggered by the global financial crisis was over by June 2009, allowing silver holders to benefit from both the Federal Reserve's monetary easing and a cyclical upturn in industrial demand. To hedge against a worst-case scenario, gold still outshines silver. For anything less, history suggests it may be time for investors to introduce a new precious metal friend to their portfolio, even while keeping the old. PepsiCo says tariffs will hurt earnings. PepsiCo relies on soda concentrate from Ireland to make its U.S. drinks. Now, facing tariff costs and plummeting consumer sentiment, the company says it no longer expects its earnings to rise this year. Unlike rival Coca-Cola, PepsiCo makes the concentrate for nearly all of its U.S. sodas in Ireland. That concentrate is now subject to a 10% tariff. Both companies also could be hurt by a 25% tariff on aluminum imports. PepsiCo said it lowered its outlook because of tariff-related supply chain costs and a drop in consumer confidence caused by inflation and the global trade war. The company said demand had fallen for its snacks, which include Doritos, Cheetos, and Lay's potato chips. PepsiCo executives Thursday said they plan to take action to mitigate the impact of tariffs on the company's supply chain costs, but declined to provide details on their plan. They said some measures would take longer to execute than others. PepsiCo also makes concentrate in Texas, Uruguay, and Singapore. Coca-Cola chief executive James Quincey has said that his company could ease the impact of aluminum tariffs by packaging more drinks in plastic bottles or sourcing aluminum from the U.S. PepsiCo now forecasts that its earnings this year on a constant currency basis will be flat compared with last year. PepsiCo had previously forecast low single-digit percentage growth. "We probably aren't feeling as good about the consumer now as we were a few months ago," PepsiCo Finance Chief Jamie Caulfield said. In North America, the company's beverage sales volume dropped 3% in the latest quarter, and its food sales volume slid 1%, dragged down by lackluster performance of its Frito-Lay snacks business. PepsiCo CEO Ramon Laguarta said consumers, under pressure, are looking for more value. As a result, he said, the company is offering smaller, single-serve packages with lower price points. After years of focusing on food and energy drinks, PepsiCo is now trying to revive its U.S. soda sales. The company on Thursday said it was making some progress, noting that the Pepsi brand was gaining market share after years of decline, driven by sales growth of Pepsi Zero Sugar. Shares of PepsiCo fell 4.9% Thursday. Comcast continues to lose broadband and cable TV subscribers but found bright spots in the first quarter with its mobile phone plans and Peacock service. The company's overall revenue slid 0.6% from the year-ago period to $29.9 billion, narrowly beating analysts' expectations. Profit fell 12.5% to $3.4 billion, due in part to asset amortization. Comcast lost 199,000 broadband customers, ending the quarter with 31.6 million subscribers. That was far more than the 146,000 that analysts polled by FactSet expected it to lose and an acceleration over the prior quarter's declines. Comcast lost 427,000 video subscribers, as its viewers continued to dump cable TV. Xfinity Mobile, Comcast's mobile service business, gained 323,000 lines in the quarter, its biggest increase in 2 years. Shares of Comcast fell 3.7% to $33.19 on Thursday. Comcast has attributed its broadband subscriber losses to intense competition from mobile service providers that also offer home internet and from more competitors that lay fiber optic cables. "We are not winning in the marketplace," said Comcast President Mike Cavanaugh. First quarter revenue in the connectivity and platforms segment fell 0.7% from the prior year to $20.10 billion. Fires surrounded Comcast's Universal Studios Hollywood theme park in January, forcing the park to close for a few days. Tourism in Los Angeles continues to be weaker, the company said. Theme park revenue fell 5% year-over-year to around $1.9 billion, though Chief Executive Brian Roberts said parks remain on an incredible growth trajectory as they prepare for the opening of the Epic Universe in Orlando, Florida, next month. NBC Universal's Peacock streaming service was a bright spot for the company, adding 5 million subscribers from the fourth quarter of 2024 and ending March with 41 million subscribers. Most of those new subscribers came through a deal with Charter Communications, in which Charter paid incremental quarterly revenue after a 16% increase from a year earlier. Business sentiment in Germany unexpectedly edged up in April, as firms shrugged off the threats to the German economy posed by U.S. President Trump's tariff policies toward Europe. The IFO Institute said Thursday that its Business Climate Index, based on around 9,000 responses from businesses in manufacturing, the service sector, trade, and construction, climbed to 86.9 in April from 86.7 in March, better than the 85.1 expected by economists surveyed by the Wall Street Journal. Companies were more positive about their current situation. However, expectations were gloomier, IFO President Clemens Fuss said. The improvement in the IFO index in April may be a sign that tariff front-loading supported activity somewhat in April, according to capital economics economist Francisca Palmas. Like the rest of the European Union, Germany faces a 10% tariff on its goods imports into the US, alongside a 25% tariff on steel, aluminum, and the auto sector. Germany hosts global car makers Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz. Potential tariffs on pharmaceutical goods could also seriously impact global giants based in Germany such as Bayer. The uptick in the index could point to a belief among German businesses of a resilient economy or ignorance of the implications of President Trump's tariff blitz, ING global head of macro Karsten Brzezinski said in a note. Are German businesses just more relaxed than financial markets or more naive? He asked. Nevertheless, more than 80% of German companies expect Trump's policies to negatively hit the economy, according to a separate poll published this week by the ZEW Mannheim Economics Research Institute. Uncertainty among the companies has increased. The German economy is preparing for turbulence, Fust added. Germany's economy contracted in the past 2 years and the outlook remains poor, with the International Monetary Fund this week downgrading economic expectations to zero growth for 2025 from 0.3% previously. I cannot exclude a slight recession this year, Bundesbank President Joachim Nagel told Bloomberg News. However, European central bank interest rate cuts, paired with Germany's loosening of its fiscal restrictions to allow massive spending increases on defense and infrastructure, have raised hopes that a flood of investment and consumer spending could put the German economy on stronger footing later in 2025. School stabbings leave one dead. A student stabbed 4 other students at a French high school on Thursday, killing at least 1 and injuring 3 others before being arrested. Police said a national police official said the attack occurred at the private Catholic Notre Dame de Toutsades High School in Nantes on France's Atlantic coast. The student stabbed 4 people with a knife during a lunch break before teachers subdued him, and he was later taken in by police. The official said, students at the school, which is part of a complex housing a primary and middle school, told French media that they had received an email from the assailant earlier in the day with unspecified grievances. Associated Press. Lebanon. World Bank grants $450 million loan. The World Bank will grant Lebanon a $250 million loan that will be used to help ease electricity cuts in the crisis-hit country, the finance ministry said on Thursday. Lebanon has faced major electricity problems for decades, but the situation became worse following an economic meltdown that began in late 2019. The 14-month Israel-Hezbollah war that ended in late November also badly damaged electricity and other infrastructure in parts of Lebanon. The World Bank has described Lebanon's economic crisis as among the world's worst since the 1850s. The loan will be used to improve collection of electricity bills as well as improving solar farms that would save $40 million annually, the state news agency reported. Associated Press. The UK government lifted sanctions against a dozen Syrian entities, including government departments and media outlets, the Foreign Office said on Thursday. The UK had put the sanctions in place during the repressive rule of President Bashar al-Assad, who was overthrown in a lightning rebel offensive in December. Financial sanctions and asset freezes were lifted on the Ministries of Interior and Defense, the Directorates of General Intelligence and Political Security, the Air Force Intelligence Agency, and Syrian National Security Bureau. Sanctions were also dropped against the General Organization of Radio and TV, Al Watan, a newspaper, Cham Press TV, and Sama TV. Associated Press. No shi. Vladimir, stop, Trump tells Putin after Kiev strike kills 12. In a social media post, the president issues a rare rebuke urging Russia to end the war. Kyiv, Ukraine. In a direct response to the biggest and deadliest aerial barrage on Kiev by Moscow's forces this year, President Trump made a personal appeal to President Vladimir Putin of Russia to stop attacks on Ukraine and agree to a peace deal. Not necessary and very bad timing, Trump said in a post on his Truth Social platform on Thursday after the attack. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done. The missile and drone attack killed 12 people and injured 90 in the Ukrainian capital, part of a countrywide assault that involved 215 missiles and explosive drones, Ukraine's Air Force said. Russia said it was targeting enterprises in Ukraine's aviation, rocket and space, machine building and armored vehicle industries, among other sites. Trump's frustration is building as talks to end the war have stalled. On Wednesday, Trump criticized President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine for refusing to accept a peace proposal that includes Washington's legal recognition of Russian sovereignty over the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia has occupied since 2014. The U.S. president pointed out that Ukraine wasn't required to recognize Crimea as Russian. But Trump had largely refrained from speaking out against Putin. When asked what concessions have been offered by Russia, Trump said, "Stopping the war, stopping taking the whole country." The attack on Kyiv, which sent residents fleeing to shelters at 1 a.m., has turned his attention to Russia's prosecution of the war and toward Putin personally. Some among the president's Republican allies have also become critical of Putin's refusal to accept a ceasefire. In March, the U.S. proposed a 30-day truce to which Ukraine agreed, but Putin declined, saying root causes of the conflict would need to be resolved first. Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, aiming to overthrow the government in Kyiv and replace it with a puppet administration that would align it with Moscow rather than the West. Trump had pledged to end the war within 24 hours on the campaign trail, but his administration has since targeted his first 100 days in office, or the end of April, as the deadline. On Thursday, Trump indicated he was willing to give Russia and Ukraine only so much more time to come to a deal before the U.S. backs out of helping with peace talks. "We are thinking that very strongly, that they both want peace, but they have to get to the table," Trump said at the White House. "I have my own deadline. And we want it to be fast." Ukraine wants an unconditional ceasefire before peace talks, but Russia has said it would agree to a longer pause in the fighting only under certain conditions, which Ukraine wouldn't accept. Trump said he was putting a lot of pressure on Putin but stopped short of saying he planned to put additional sanctions on Russia. The U.S. has put forward a proposal that would freeze the front line at its current position, allowing Russia to keep most of the territory it has taken during the conflict. Ukraine would have to give up aspirations to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The two-page document makes no explicit statement about future U.S. military support for Ukraine in the event Russia invades again, officials said, but leaves open the possibility that other European forces could support Kyiv. It doesn't put limits on the size of Ukraine's armed forces, something Russia had wanted. Ukraine has pushed back on the proposal, and it isn't clear that Russia would agree to the terms. The Kremlin has said it was determined to continue with peace negotiations and wouldn't comment on the issue of U.S. recognition of Crimea. Trump said on Thursday that returning Crimea to Ukraine would be a very difficult thing to do. Even as Putin talked about peace and announced a short-lived and poorly observed Easter ceasefire, Russian troops launched a spring offensive across the front line. This week, the Russian president spoke at a military conference about Russia's expanding arms production, especially in drones, as well as the need to increase defense production for the front line. On Thursday, Zelensky told a news conference in South Africa, where he had traveled to attend a Group of 20 meeting, that Ukraine's willingness to have a ceasefire and negotiate with a country that had attacked and occupied its territory was a big compromise. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched 145 drones early Thursday, all but 7 of which were intercepted, and 70 missiles, of which 48 were knocked down. The occupiers, suffering critical losses at the front and having no strategic gains, are acting like terrorists, striking civilian infrastructure and our cities, killing women and children, said Gen. Oleksandr Syrsky, head of Ukraine's armed forces. Videos of the attack show 2 missiles dropping out of the sky, one after another, with a mushrooming cloud of smoke following. One of the hardest-hit places was Kyiv's Svyatoshin neighborhood, where the blast tore through a residential area, collapsing buildings, blowing out walls and windows, crumpling cars, and smashing through trees. 12 buildings were damaged, Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said. Rescuers who arrived at the site found one woman buried deep in the debris. They dug her out by the light of flashlights and sent her for medical treatment. Even as rescuers searched for victims, the air raid alert continued, at one point forcing them to stop and seek shelter as Russia launched a fresh wave of drones and ballistic missiles. Moscow's mass killings of civilians have intensified in recent weeks, including a strike in Kryvyi Rih that killed 9 children and 11 adults, and one in Sumy that killed 35 people. She lays groundwork for long tariff battle. As President Trump tries to play hardball in his trade war with Xi Jinping, he faces an adversary who has armed China to play a long and possibly painful game with the U.S. In the weeks since Trump slapped sky-high tariffs on China, Beijing has responded with defiance. A spokeswoman for China's foreign ministry posted on X footage from 1953 of Mao Zedong promising to fight to the end against U.S.-led forces in the Korean War. "We are Chinese," she wrote. "We don't back down." The Mao post and other messages from Beijing highlight what China sees as one of its core advantages against the U.S. While Trump and his Republican backers are vulnerable to the whims of U.S. voters, the party that Mao built is deeply entrenched, having maintained power through more than 7 decades despite war, famine, political upheaval, and financial crises. She isn't resting on those laurels. Since an earlier trade war during the first Trump administration, Xi has intensified his grip on the country's leadership and reinforced the authoritarian tools that underpin the party's longevity, including enhancements to the world's most sophisticated systems for censorship and surveillance. The Chinese leader wants to harden his country specifically for a confrontation with the U.S., urging officials to engage in what he calls extreme scenario thinking. Trump already struck a more conciliatory tone this week, saying he is willing to cut tariffs on Chinese goods. His administration is considering slashing the levies, in some cases by more than half, in a bid to de-escalate tensions. Asked whether the administration was actively talking with Beijing on trade, Trump said Wednesday, "Actively. Everything is active." Trump reiterated Thursday that the U.S. is talking with Beijing, without providing details. A Chinese foreign ministry spokesman dismissed suggestions that the two sides were negotiating as fake news. "This tariff war was launched by the U.S., spokesman Guo Jiaquan said Thursday. "If we fight, we will fight to the end. If we talk, the door is wide open." The White House hasn't said what it hopes to achieve in negotiations with China. Any push to significantly reduce the U.S.'s $295 billion trade deficit would require China to fundamentally change its economic model. In Xi, Trump is facing off with an equally pugilistic figure. Before he even took power, Xi swiped at foreigners with full bellies and nothing better to do who had the temerity to criticize China. He has repeatedly stated his belief that the age of U.S. dominance is nearing its end, due in large part to the capitalist excesses of the very consumer-driven economy the U.S. hopes to foist on China. Where the Trump administration is riven with factions and embraces chaos, Xi is focused on stability. He eliminated term limits in 2018 and has used an endless crackdown on corruption to centralize power to a greater degree than any leader since Mao. He has packed the party's top leadership with officials experienced in propaganda and security, who have made it a priority to inoculate China against the risk of mass dissent. "Chinese society has an incredibly high capacity for pain," said Yaxing Huang, a professor of global economics at the MIT Sloan School of Management and author of the forthcoming Statism with Chinese Characteristics. The Trump administration could inflict real pain on China, which is heavily dependent on exports for growth. The country's debt-laden economy grew by 5% in 2024, according to official figures, though that number has its skeptics. By some estimates, the new Trump tariffs could wipe out half or more of Chinese exports to the U.S. Economists at Goldman Sachs estimate that as many as 20 million workers in China are exposed to U.S. exports. No political system and no political leader could emerge unscathed by tariffs of the dimension proposed by Trump if they go ahead in a sustained fashion, said Richard McGregor, a China expert at the Lowy Institute, an Australian think tank. Factories will close and many thousands of people will lose their jobs. Workers are the biggest drivers of dissent in China, accounting for more than 40% of in-person and online protests in the first 3 quarters of 2024, according to tracking by China Dissent Monitor, a project of the US-based nonprofit Freedom House. Some of the messages aimed at rallying the country for the trade fight have met with skepticism on Chinese social media sites, suggesting the party could face pushback if the economy were to suffer significantly. Xi has said he worries that China's young people are unwilling to suffer for the good of the country. The Tiananmen Square pro-democracy protests loom large in the minds of Communist Party leaders, who view demonstrations and the bloody crackdown that ended them as an existential crisis fueled by economic mismanagement. While students led the protests, the crowds in and around the square were mostly made up of workers angry over consumer inflation hovering at 18% that year. If similar discontent were to boil up from a trade war, the party could turn to a mix of responses, including fiscal stimulus, targeted subsidies for affected industries, and direct handouts to laid-off workers. It could also wield the vast stability maintenance machinery that the party built to raise the political system's pain threshold after the Tiananmen crackdown, which has ballooned in size and sophistication under Xi. That system includes human and AI-powered censorship and surveillance networks designed to preempt dissent, backed up by an army of police and domestic security agents. China budgeted the equivalent of $209 billion on domestic security in 2023, the most recent year official data is available. That figure, which doesn't capture spending on surveillance technology initiatives, amounts to 175% of what the U.S. spent on policing in 2023 when accounting for cost differences in the two countries. Xi is also encouraging expansion of human surveillance through the adoption of the Fengqiao model, named after a town where residents were known in the Mao era for reporting their fellow citizens' errant behavior. The country's network of intelligent surveillance cameras continues to expand. President Trump's apparent softening on tariffs against China in recent days has buoyed markets and raised hopes for a détente between the world's two largest economies. For Chinese leaders, it only strengthens their resolve that Trump will eventually cave if they wait him out. After weeks of spiraling hostilities, Trump now says he is willing to cut tariffs on Chinese goods. His administration is considering slashing levies in some cases by more than half to de-escalate tensions with Beijing, the Wall Street Journal reported Wednesday. While such a reprieve would ease anxiety over further escalation, it wouldn't prevent a painful rupture between the world's two biggest economies. Nor would it likely be enough to satisfy Beijing. This tariff war was launched by the US, and the Chinese side's position has always been clear and consistent, Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo Jiaquan said Thursday. If we fight, we will fight to the end. If we talk, the door is wide open. Any dialogue or negotiation must be based on equality, respect, and mutual benefit. Asked on Wednesday whether the administration was actively talking with Beijing on trade, Trump responded, "Actively. Everything is active." A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman dismissed any suggestion that the two sides were negotiating as fake news. On Thursday, Trump said the administration is talking about trade with Beijing, without providing details. A spokesman for China's Commerce Ministry called on Trump to eliminate unilateral tariffs against China if he is serious about resolving disputes. For weeks, leader Xi Jinping has been sending a strong message to the Chinese people that Beijing is prepared to trade blows with Washington on tariffs, and that they should be ready for a struggle. Embedded in that calculus are memories of the first trade war with Trump, when attempts to accommodate White House demands failed to ease trade tensions. Instead, in the years that followed, she says, the US has only grown more aggressive. Today, China says it is better prepared to withstand US tariffs, with its economy less reliant on American technology and its trading partnerships more diversified. China's reluctance to talk reflects, in part, a lack of trust. The Trump administration is constantly shifting positions, so just listening to a few statements isn't enough. Jean Sanrong, a prominent international relations professor at Renmin University in Beijing, wrote on Chinese social media platform Weibo. Wait and see whether the US takes any concrete action. China hasn't said under what conditions it would be willing to start negotiations, though the Foreign Ministry spokesman said Thursday that Trump must first abandon his maximum pressure tactics. A potentially attractive option to Beijing would be for both sides to temporarily roll back recent tariff increases. If Trump offers a postponement of recent tariff hikes while the two sides enter into negotiations, Beijing will reciprocate, wrote Michael Herson, head of China research at New York-based 22V Research and previously the U.S. Treasury Department's chief representative in China. However, if Trump demands that Beijing first make concessions, China's leadership will wait to see if political and economic pressures force Trump to back down. Xi's strategy in part reflects the vast political power he has amassed at home and the government's machinery to beat back any dissent. By contrast, Trump faces midterm elections 18 months from now. Well aware of the divisions inside the U.S., Chinese state media in recent weeks has portrayed Trump as out of touch with many voters, his policies stirring inflationary concerns and raising uncertainty that has hampered business investment and hiring. On Thursday, it highlighted the news that 12 states have sued the Trump administration over the tariffs. But Xi isn't immune to domestic criticism over China's economy, suffering from a property market bust, rising debt, and sluggish consumer confidence. As many as 20 million people work in Chinese factories geared toward U.S. exports, Goldman Sachs estimates, jobs that a shutdown in trade would put at risk. Despite these challenges, she believes the Chinese economy can withstand a collapse in trade. With the U.S. officials are rolling out stimulus measures aimed at boosting consumption and investment in infrastructure. Beijing is also betting that Chinese exporters will be able to find new buyers, though many governments are wary of yet more Chinese imports. Even if the two sides can agree to dial back tariffs, analysts are downbeat about the prospects for a comprehensive deal to end trade hostilities. Washington is signaling it wants root and branch reform of China's economy, and not a repeat of earlier pledges to buy more American goods. Beijing is unlikely to want to give the impression that Washington is setting its domestic priorities, said Julian Evans Pritchard, head of China economics at Capital Economics. Tensions could easily flare up again if talks get nowhere, he said, with the risk that conflict spills over into other areas such as cross-border investment and finance. There are still lots of areas where we could get further decoupling, Evans Pritchard said. Even if President Trump were to slash tariffs to between roughly 50% and 65%, one possibility under consideration by the White House, it could still leave many Chinese products shut out of U.S. markets. That's still very prohibitive, said Louise Liu, lead economist for China at Oxford Economics in Singapore. At those levels, most of the trade flows would probably be rerouted anyway. The difference for China's economy would likewise prove negligible. When Trump floated a 60% tariff on all Chinese goods during his presidential campaign, Oxford Economics estimated it would reduce Chinese gross domestic product by about 2% compared with tariffs staying where they were. With tariffs of 145%, the hit is only slightly larger, at 2.2%, highlighting how most of the damage was done with the initial tariff actions. Tariffs of 100% or more on strategic goods would constitute a trade embargo on those products, Liu said. Last month, Republican lawmakers introduced bills that would ban Chinese nationals from accessing national labs or seeking U.S. student visas. Also in March, GOP Republic John Molinar of Michigan, chair of the House Select Committee on China, sent requests to the presidents of 6 universities demanding information about Chinese students in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math programs. America's student visa system has become a Trojan horse for Beijing, providing unrestricted access to our top research institutions and posing a direct threat to our national security, Molinar wrote in his requests. Critics of the increased scrutiny have said that targeting Chinese scientists threatens to erode American competitiveness. Big STEM presence. China is the largest source of international doctoral students in STEM programs, according to the National Science Foundation. Most U.S.-trained Chinese scientists have stayed on, educating new generations of scientists and engineers at U.S. universities or helping to drive innovation at American companies, according to experts in science policy. The more you close up and set up boundaries and borders, it's just going to weaken your science, said Caroline S. Wagner, who researches science and technology policy at Ohio State University. The bills in Washington aren't certain to pass, and it couldn't be determined whether the universities have responded to Molinar's requests. Visas for scores of Chinese students, including some who are doing frontier artificial intelligence research at top-tier universities, have been revoked in recent days without explanation. I've had clients call me when they got contacted by the FBI. Is my house going to be raided? Said Rob Fisher, a lawyer at Nixon Peabody who represented 2 scientists indicted during the first Trump administration. You have a whole community of scientists who live in fear. The hundreds of investigations that the Trump administration started through the China Initiative and a parallel campaign at the National Institutes of Health turned up criminal activity in only a small number of cases, though the climate it conjured prompted an exodus of scientists. Between 2018 and 2021, 5,361 Chinese scientists in STEM fields left the U.S. for China, a 53% surge over the previous 4-year period, according to a study published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Wang, who joined the Indiana University faculty in 2004, had frequently worked with academics in China on projects related to cryptography, privacy, and cybersecurity. According to an archived version of his removed faculty page, he was listed as the lead researcher on nearly $23 million in research grants since joining the university. The university contacted Wang in December to inquire about a 2017 grant in China with his name on it, according to people familiar with the matter. Wang wasn't aware of the grant, which had been applied for by his Chinese research partners, the People said. The university opened a formal investigation into Wang several weeks before the FBI raids. The FBI confirmed searching Wang's homes but declined to say whether the searches were related to his employment. The Department of Justice objected last week to a motion to unseal the search warrants. The Bloomington chapter of the American Association of University Professors said the university denied Wang due process in his termination. More than 700 U.S.-based scholars signed a letter to the university's provost issued Tuesday protesting Wang's dismissal. It hurts deeply that a country that we trusted and contributed to for so long now treats us like criminals, Ma, Wang's wife, said in a virtual address to supporters last week. Trump's rearview antitrust battles. The Trump administration wants to promote U.S. tech innovation and competition. Then why is it fighting rearview antitrust battles that would do the opposite? A federal trial kicked off this week in the Justice Department's 5-year-old case against Google for allegedly monopolizing internet search. After ruling for DOJ last summer, Judge Amit Mehta is now holding hearings on remedies. DOJ wants the judge to break up Google and hamstring the search giant in the artificial intelligence race. Judge Mehta admitted in his ruling that Google has not achieved market dominance by happenstance. It has hired thousands of highly skilled engineers, innovated consistently, and made shrewd business decisions. The result is the industry's highest quality search engine, which has earned Google the trust of hundreds of millions of daily users. That doesn't sound like anti-consumer behavior, which is supposed to be the gravamen of antitrust. Nonetheless, the judge held that Google's payments to web browsers and device manufacturers like Apple and Samsung to be featured as their default search engine cemented Google's dominance. Never mind that Google's partners chose it, because its search engine provides the best bet for monetizing queries, as the judge wrote. By harvesting more data, Google could supposedly better target ads and improve its search quality, thus reinforcing its dominance. In sum, businesses engaged in mutually beneficial transactions that benefited users. What's the antitrust problem here? Unclear, but DOJ's remedy is to punish Google anyway. The government wants to force Google to divest its Chrome browser to degrade its ability to target ads. This would hurt advertisers while helping other companies that serve up ads such as Amazon and Meta. DOJ also wants to require Google to share search data with competitors like Microsoft and OpenAI. DOJ says the judge should ban Google from paying for default placement on browsers and devices. Even Mozilla, a browser competitor to Google's Chrome, said the government's misguided plans would be a direct hit to small and independent browsers, the very forces that keep the web open, innovative, and free, and primarily benefit big tech companies like Microsoft. Meanwhile, antitrust regulators are investigating Microsoft and OpenAI. Would the real monopolists please stand up? The reality is that AI is rapidly disrupting the search market with fierce competition among such large language models as OpenAI's ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, Meta's Llama, and China's DeepSeek. Google was late to publicly roll out AI models. ChatGPT has 5 times as many daily active users as Google's Gemini. No matter. DOJ wants to limit how Google integrates AI into its products, including to enhance its search engine. Call it government-planned obsolescence. If Google can't innovate, it will lose ground to competitors. That's the government's goal. How does strangling a company help competition? A separate trial is underway over the Federal Trade Commission's attempt to force Meta to divest WhatsApp and Instagram. The FTC's arguments were weak when it sued in December 2020, and they're less compelling now. The FTC blessed Meta's acquisitions of WhatsApp and Instagram more than a decade ago. But the agency now argues in hindsight that the deals were anti-competitive. The FTC claims Meta should have developed its own versions of WhatsApp and Instagram. Yet neither app at the time of Meta's purchase generated a profit, and it wasn't clear if they ever would. Not all acquisitions succeed. The FTC claims the current popularity of Instagram and WhatsApp is evidence that Facebook absorbed potential competitors. But these apps might not have been as successful without Meta's improvements. In any case, Meta vigorously competes for users, so-called influencers and advertisers with X.com, TikTok, and YouTube, among other platforms. The FTC says Meta's only true competitors are Snapchat and a tiny app called MeWe. Your 16-year-old knows better. Users spend more time on TikTok and YouTube than either Facebook or Instagram. TikTok, a nascent video app in 2020, now boasts nearly as many users as Instagram. What is the FTC really trying to accomplish? Trump FTC Chair Andrew Ferguson last week said the case is about addressing the power of Meta and making sure that the situation we had in 2020 can never arise again. He seems to be referring to Facebook's suppression of the New York Post's Hunter Biden laptop story before the November 2020 election. That episode was outrageous. But Mr. Ferguson gives the real motivation away. The goal is to break up the companies because they are large and have a history of censoring conservatives. But Elon Musk's purchase of X.com has already spurred a more open social media marketplace for conservative ideas. Competition solves market problems better than regulators, who keep measuring monopoly by markets that evolve faster than a bureaucracy can keep up. Jerome Powell's oh-so-lucky trade war. Any old fool can turn lemons into lemonade. It takes real talent to transform the lemonade back into a lemon. It's a skill President Trump has demonstrated time and again, most recently this past week in his latest feud with Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. The battle began with a characteristically florid social media post in which Mr. Trump complained that Mr. Powell is always too late and wrong in his monetary policy. Mr. Trump wishes the Fed would cut interest rates to offset the negative economic consequences of his tariffs. The post ended with a demand for Mr. Powell's termination. Or perhaps the duel started the day before, when Mr. Powell suggested the tariffs might force the Fed to make uncomfortable choices between raising rates to manage tariff-driven inflation and cutting them to ameliorate tariff-caused unemployment, and that the central bank might err on the side of fighting inflation. Whoever started it, the market settled it. Equities, bonds, and the dollar all sank on investors' fears that Mr. Trump might jeopardize the Fed's institutional independence. This forced Mr. Trump to cave, with an assertion this week that he has no intention to fire Mr. Powell. For now, anyway. Mr. Trump's flip-flop is the latest example of how Mr. Powell is having an undeservedly good trade war. Cast your mind back to where the Fed and its leader stood before noon on January. Mr. Trump's inauguration day. The central bank was reeling from its worst policy error in 40 years. The Fed acted too late, as Mr. Trump correctly says, to tamp down an inflation surge that started in spring 2021. The central bank still hasn't brought the inflation rate back to its 2% target. Worse, Mr. Powell had personally thrown his rhetorical weight behind the pandemic-era government spending blowouts that contributed to the price rises. Along the way, the Fed faced a series of theoretical and operational challenges that under other circumstances might have fatally undermined its credibility. Its economic models had proved serially incapable of anticipating the economy's future path or suggesting appropriate monetary policies. These faceplants include its panic decision in autumn 2024 to cut short-term interest rates by a full percentage point over 4 months, a mistake in retrospect. The post-2008 expansion of the Fed's balance sheet under quantitative easing turned out to be difficult to reverse without triggering financial market ructions. Central bank regulators missed looming disasters such as Silicon Valley Bank. All of these errors contributed to a persistent sense after 2008 among many voters that the economy wasn't working quite right. That frustration exploded in 2024 along with prices, and got Mr. Trump elected. A more focused disruptor-in-chief would have seized the moment to engage in a root-and-branch reform of the Fed alongside other failed government agencies. Mr. Trump even has some advisors who could help. Before he started spouting eccentric theories about global trade, Stephen Miron, chairman of Mr. Trump's Council of Economic Advisors, had some useful thoughts on Fed reform. Firing Mr. Powell could have been part of the package. Seen through this lens, the problem with Mr. Trump's recent fulminations against Mr. Powell isn't so much their content as their purposelessness. For all the speeches Mr. Powell has given about the Fed's dilemmas in the age of tariffs, it's still more likely than not that the central bank would have delivered Mr. Trump's preferred looser monetary policy eventually anyway. The Fed's economic models are predisposed to look through one-time price-level shocks such as new tariffs and to worry more about a softening labor market. Mr. Powell would have faced growing pressure from Wall Street to surrender to these policy urges. One reasonable interpretation of Mr. Powell's recent comments implying otherwise is that he's trying to use forward guidance to temper inflation expectations precisely so that he can cut rates later. Mr. Trump's perverse genius is that he has made it much harder for everyone to do what he wants them to do. Institutional reform of the Fed is off the table, given that investors and hostile politicians now could interpret any such move as an assault on central bank independence. Mr. Powell may find it difficult to cut interest rates even if he otherwise would want to, for fear of creating an impression the Fed has caved. And Wall Street will cheer him on if so, rather than demanding a Powell put to rescue markets from the tariffs. Though it'll surely frustrate Mr. Trump, this may be the best thing that could happen to the president. Inflation is the great popularity killer of American politics, and he has now made it harder for the Fed to perpetuate inflationary errors for which he might have to pay a price. As always, one needs a healthy sense of irony to navigate the Trump era with sanity more or less intact. Reagan's 1982 tax hike is a cautionary tale for Trump. On December 30, 1981, I met with President Ronald Reagan to go over a draft of his first State of the Union address, an opportunity to review his first year in office. Reagan had much to celebrate, especially regarding his goal of economic recovery from the Carter years. But while the president had signed large tax cuts into law in August, he saw clouds gathering and wanted to discuss them. Days before our meeting, an article in the New York Times reported that the Baker-Stockman axis in the White House and the Office of Management and Budget wants to mitigate cuts in the income taxes by imposing new taxes in other areas. The story referred to James Baker, Reagan's chief of staff, and David Stockman, director of the OMB. Other Reagan aides had also proposed such taxes and leaked to at least one news outlet that if Reagan didn't go along, they hoped the taxes would be thrust upon the president by Congress. Reagan caught wind of the speculation, which came up in our conversation that day. "Regarding tax increases, I'm not weakening a bit," he told me. "I read today that unnamed sources say I will raise taxes." It was precisely the mistake that Margaret Thatcher made in England, he added, believing that by raising taxes to accomplish other goals, Thatcher set back Britain's economic recovery. That political intrigue may be repeating itself today. This newspaper has reported whispers from within the White House that aides to President Trump are working behind the scenes to pull off a tax increase to rescue favored spending programs. It could be a wealth tax or some other masquerade, but the purpose is a connivance to press Mr. Trump to raise income taxes. The scenario is eerily familiar. Notwithstanding what Reagan insisted to me in that December meeting, his own team and congressional leaders were already working to persuade the president that the tax increases he would sign into law a year after his historic tax cut weren't really increases after all. It was merely an effort to close loopholes in the tax code. They maintained a comprehensive plan to get the deficits down that could even strengthen the president's leadership image. The lipstick on that pig had a fancy name, the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act. Years later, when Reagan and I collaborated on his presidential farewell speech to the Republican National Convention in 1988, he complained that the 1982 tax increase he reluctantly embraced was among the worst decisions of his presidency. The fellas promised I would get $3 of spending cuts for every dollar of taxes I agreed to. Instead, for every dollar in new taxes, we got $1.70 in new spending, the complete reversal of what I was promised. That was wrong and I shouldn't have agreed to it.